That's what I found with the Amersy story when I end up in a room in a law firm being screamed at by him. And I get this sense, you know, man to man, of the rage, the wrath of someone who is so rich that they think that only their version of reality should be told.
There's a fascinating character in your book. Hopefully I'm pronouncing his name right. Muhammad Amersy.
Yeah.
So I want people to read your book, and I don't want to give a spoiler alert about the book. But what a story this is. So give us the high notes of who he is, what he did, what the perpetration was, your response to it, and what does it tell you about the very wealthy?
Well, Muhammad Amersy, an intriguing man. I first heard about him actually when I was in the middle of being sued by some oligarchs myself who didn't like my previous book and wanted it. I've never quite figured out what actually how they want books destroyed, either burned or pulped or whatever it might be. But anyway, taken off the shelves. And then I heard about this other case that was going on in the UK, you know, the capital of privatized censorship, and it was that of a major donor to the Conservative Party. Isn't at the moment, but tends to be in power here, and this major donor had employed the most ferocious of the London reputation management law firms, Carter Ruck. And the firm on his behalf was sending threatening letters to a former MP, Charlotte Leslie, saying that she had done something unforgivable and appalling. And what she had done is she'd written a memo that, among other things, had raised a few questions about where does this rich donor, Muhammad Amersy's money come from? And he was having none of this. He thought she was getting in the way of his big ambitions. And I thought, first of all, this is an extraordinary example, isn't it, of wealth being deployed in the service of the narrative that the rich wish to prevail. But also I thought, if you're prepared to go to such lengths to shut down even a little bit of scrutiny, I wonder what that past is. And that's where I set off. And that road then took me, well, the war in Ukraine started, so I couldn't go back to Russia by then, but it took me through contacts back into the past of Putin's St. Petersburg, and then on to elsewhere in the former Soviet Union, other places where Amersy had made huge amounts of money. So he'd made money in Russia, and then it was Kazakhstan, there was Uzbekistan. I went to Nepal, to Kathmandu, to track down on the trail of a Nepali oligarch that Amersy had done business with, all in the booming telecoms industry. And then there comes this moment where he's made his money, and about 10 years ago he transforms into something else. He transforms into a pillar of the British establishment, and he does this with the help of the nephew of the now Queen. And there's this extraordinary sort of metamorphosis into a philanthropist, a donor to Oxford University, a donor to the Conservative Party, a man for whom no door in the land from the Prime Minister down is ever closed. And what I try to do is simply to tell his story and the truth of his story, how he made his money, how he wrote his own story, and how in the British political and social system, no one wants to ask questions about where the money came from.
You know, it's fascinating because we interviewed the author of The Butler to the World and the whole story of London being a great center.
Right, Oliver Bullough, great guy.
Yeah, Oliver's a great guy, and so you know we interviewed him to talk about this money laundering, and you know we also know from the global financial crisis that the drug lords around the world propped up the banking system with their illegal money sluicing through the marketplace and supposedly being laundered by the banks and offering some level of reserve protection. So is it just that we're flawed? Is it just that we're going to always have some seamy people in our societies that are doing these things, and our governments are, for whatever reason, going to turn a blind eye?
I think it's a constant struggle, isn't it? I think that the way political funding has gone, certainly in the US, and it's heading that way, I think more and more in Europe, means that the incentives are all wrong. So those who rule in our name are supposed to do that, right? Rule in our name. But and we can still scrutinize politicians pretty effectively in the press, whether the sort of traditional mainstream press or in newer forms. Try to scrutinize the people who fund politics. Try to scrutinize the people who pay for access, who get to shape the policies of governments, and you're likely to get a terrifying legal letter. I think you're right that to an extent there's always going to be people who are, for whatever reasons, a combination of self-importance and vanity, and sometimes more sinister reasons, are trying to worm their way into politics. I would just say, though, that this is becoming like a big national security problem as well, in that the channels, I mean, in the US it's very familiar through Citizens United and so on, like the channels to influence the powerful are so unpoliced that it's been recognized in the UK that this is wide open to malign influence by whether it's Putin's regime or whichever other hostile state. And yet it's in the interests of the ruling class, if you like. It's in the interests of those who profit politically from hoovering up this money, no questions asked, to continue not to ask any questions. And it's completely antithetical to the democratic spirit, right? I think that's what's ultimately so terrifying about it, is that it's insulating the most powerful people from the scrutiny that we really need to impose on them if we're going to have healthy societies. And that's what I found with the Amersi story, when I end up in a room in a law firm being screamed at by him, and I get this sense, man to man, of the rage, the wrath of someone who is so rich that they think that only their version of reality should be told.
So we have a person in our midst. He's worth about $200 billion. He spent $44 billion on Twitter. He renamed it X. He's got several 100 million followers. Obviously, he's opened up the spigot of the algorithm so that he can reach, I don't know. I mean, you tell me, that's half the population of Europe if you got 250 million followers, right? So, 2/3 of the United States. And he's politically active. And he's pretty supportive of Donald Trump at this point, even though Donald Trump derogated him during the administration and said all kinds of mean and nasty things about him. He's in the Trump camp. What do you make of the psychology of all this? I mean, you're right about it. So just share with me what you think of the psychology of these people in terms of how they're thinking about things, why they're doing what they're doing. As an example, he says he's for free speech. He hired Don Lemon, a hard left guy who's openly gay African-American. He had a bad interview with him. He fired him summarily. So what do you think of all this?
I think we touched on this earlier when we said that I think any of us, there's this great expression. I think I know it from William Burroughs, actually. It says, "Wouldn't you?" I think he's talking about heroin addiction, but anyone given enough power is going to indulge their worst impulses, I think. And this is the problem. The gradually, over several decades, the winnowing away of the constraints on the powerful, right? Especially those whose power comes from wealth. What's the psychology at play? Well, I was able to see Amersi very close up for a long time, sometimes in person, sometimes by speaking to people who knew him. And I think part of it is a desire for an age-old desire for status, right? For praise, for recognition, for being seen as the good guy, right? Nobody wants to be the nobody. I went back to a passage in Orwell recently when he writes fascinatingly about, what he calls the lords of property and their hired liars, and how, on any side of any war, on any side of partisan politics, you're going to find people who are simply trying to amass personal influence. And maybe partly Orwell said it's to not be forgotten. You mentioned at the beginning about, you can't take any of this with you. But I think, in a sense, it's a hedge against death, isn't it? Just a desperate desire not to be one of the almost everybody whose name will be completely lost to history.
Yeah, well, this is the whole thing with the art world. The art is immortal, or at least perception-wise. Da Vinci's paintings, we can see them from 500 years ago, and they're still with us, his expression of his genius. And so people want to capture that and put it on their walls. They think it's going to create more permanence.
But these are works of art, aren't we? We're talking about work. We're talking about constructed. We're not talking about real people, right? We're talking about the image that they
Yes,
and
exactly.
their, as Orwell would say, hired liars create. And that almost is a work of art they want to be hanging on lots of people's walls after they're gone. I think maybe fundamentally there's something like that going on.